Okay. So today we are discussing a new market structure, which is monopolistic competition. So we finished perfect competition, we finished monopoly, and today it's monopolistic competition. So um, does anybody remember, when we first started perfect competition, we looked at something that looked like this. I was sort of discussing, it was like a spectrum where we saw where each one of the market structures that we looked at were located. So perfect competition was the most competitive, so it was on one end, and monopoly, which was the least competitive, was on the other end, and then in between we had monopolistic competition. And then there was this other kind, which we're going to look at after we finish monopolistic competition, which is oligopoly. Okay. So the reason we looked at perfect competition and monopoly first, the two extreme ends, is because they are the extreme cases. So once we have an understanding of what a market looks like when there is a lot of competition, and then what a market looks like when there is really no competition, and then it's easier to look at these markets in between. Okay. So they provide, once we have the foundation for these perfect competition and monopoly, the other ones are relatively easier to understand. So today, we are starting our discussion on monopolistic competition, and as the name suggests, it is sort of a blend between monopoly and perfect competition because it shares some characteristics with both of those two market structures. So let's take a look at what some of these characteristics are. Okay. So first of all, there are a relatively large number of farms in monopolistic competition. So remember, so how many farms were there in monopoly?
One.
One, exactly. So there was only one farm when it was the entire market. There was really no difference between the farm and the market in monopoly. But with perfect competition, we saw that there were an infinitely large number of farms in perfect competition. So monopolistic competition is in between. It's more than monopoly, but of course, obviously, it's less than perfect competition. And because there are a large number of farms in this market and they're competing with each other for the market share, so each farm holds a fairly small share of the market. Okay. And then the type of product that they're selling is their differentiated and heterogeneous product. Okay. So with perfect competition, it was products that were completely identical and perfect substitutes for each other. With monopoly, it was unique product that was original and that nobody else had a substitutes for. With monopolistic competition, it's different, right? The products are different and heterogeneous, but then there are close substitutes that are also available. Okay, so if you think about fast food, okay, so which is a good example of monopolistic competition. Okay, so McDonald's is one of those fast food restaurants, and McDonald's offer one sandwich which is called the Big Mac, right? So the Big Mac, you can only get it at McDonald's, right? So in that sense, they have a sort of a monopoly on the Big Mac because you cannot get it at any of the other fast food markets. But also at the same time, there is nothing that is really different about the Big Mac that you wouldn't be able to find at the Jack in the Box or Burger King or some other. The burgers are more or less similar. There might be differences in sauce, there might be differences in like patty, I don't know. But if you really wanted to, like, it's not like a monopoly where you wouldn't be able to find that product anywhere else. there so this is how it is sort of similar but also different than a monopoly, where the product is differentiated, it is heterogeneous, but also at the same time there are close substitutes available. Okay. Another example would be like a hairdresser. So there are many different salons that you can go to cut your hair, and they might be different based on the barber, or any for a number of other reasons. They might be kind of different from each other, but at the end of the day, the service they're offering is our haircuts. So if you really couldn't, it's like if your favorite salon increased their price by a lot, you can easily go down to another salon on the block and get your hair cut from there. It wouldn't be the end of the world. Okay. And so because they have heterogeneous products, each farm in this monopolistic market faces their own downward sloping demand curve, and also downward sloping marginal revenue curve. Okay. So when we talked about monopoly, we saw that they have the same thing, right? They have with monopoly, they have a downward sloping demand curve, and they face the entire market demand. So whatever kind of demand there is for the product in the market, this monopoly, this farm had to basically provide the entire market, or serve the entire market's demand. So it's not that same case with the monopolistic competition. Even though their demand curve, the individual farms demand curve looks the same. Okay. It looks the same, it's a downward sloping demand curve, but of course the demand curve that they're facing here is not the market demand curve, because there are quite a few number of farms in this market. So the demand that one farm faces is not the entire market demand for this product. Okay. Monopolistic competition. And then there is easy entry or exit in this monopolistic competition. So with monopoly, we saw that there were huge barriers to entry or exit, from to come into a monopoly market or to exit from a monopoly market. But it's not the case with monopolistic competition, which is very close to perfect competition. It was the same with perfect competition, that there were no barriers, or very few barriers to entry or exit. So if you saw profit, you could come in. If you were making losses, you could exit the industry. So in this case, it is different than monopoly, but also but similar to perfect competition. One of the major barriers in monopolistic competition is with advertising. So here, because the products that each farm is selling, they're they're different, but also at the same time they're not very different than each other. So all the time these farms have to advertise their products, and really have to try and convince customers that the product that they're selling is somewhat different or somewhat better than their competitors. So they have to really spend a lot of money with advertising, trying to differentiate their product. So that could be like a major barrier. Okay, so that's probably like the only one. Any question here so far?
No.
Okay. And then this we mentioned, each individual farm faces a downward sloping demand curve and a downward sloping marginal revenue curve. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that one other difference with monopoly and monopolistic competition is that with monopoly, the demand curve, you could think about it as being more inelastic, right? And then with monopolistic competition, the demand is more elastic. Okay, so it's more flatter. And with monopoly, the demand curve will probably be more inelastic and steeper. Okay, which should make sense because, elasticity has to do with, sensitivity to price. So if you are a monopoly and you are selling something that, nobody else has, so even if you raise your price, people are not gonna budge very much, right? They're not gonna be that sensitive to price, unless it was like an extremely high, increase in price, right? If it's a little bit, you're probably gonna still have your customers. Whereas with monopolistic competition, if one farm raises their price, because they're not selling something that is, unique, that nobody else has, you can, just go to, if your fast food restaurant increase their price, or if your hairdresser increase their price, you can just go to, find an alternative, right? Alternatives are available. So therefore, that's why the demand that the monopolistically competitive farms face, they tend to be fairly elastic, right? Which means that they're more sensitive to price changes. Okay. And then we're going to talk about, profit maximizing, right? Profit maximization. How do they set their price and quantity? And remember always that the profit maximization rule, right? How much to produce is the same for all farms, all types of markets. Okay, so it's where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. This is where you set your quantity, and then you'll find the price, of course, by finding where that quantity meets the demand curve. Okay, so let me just draw it for you over here. So this is demand, this is their marginal revenue, and then I'm going to draw the marginal cost curve. Where marginal cost and marginal revenue intersects, that's where my profit maximizing quantity is going to be. This is how much I will, the monopolistically competitive farm will choose to produce. And then from this, I'm going to find, once I find this Q star, I'm going to find where this Q star meets my demand curve, because I want to know what is the maximum, the highest willingness to pay for this Q star is, right? Which is over here. So I just dash it over, go to the vertical axis and find my P star. Okay, so this is my P star and Q star. This is how you choose your profit maximizing quantity, and also, the price that you can set. Because, you are a downward, you face a downward sloping demand curve, which basically tells us that there is some price influencing power. So they can set their price, and this is how they will find where the price is going to be. Okay. So then, in for monopolistically competitive markets, they can have they can actually have profit or loss in the short run. They can have economic profit or economic loss in the short run. Okay, so let's try to show, what that situation would look like, if they're making economic profit in the short run. Okay, so in order to show profit, of course, I'm going to have to bring in the average total cost curve. So remember, when you draw the average total cost, the minimum of the average total cost curve will cross marginal cost. Okay, so here, as you can see, this whole difference is price, and then this, right, this over here, this is the average total cost of Q star. So then this difference, P minus ATC times Q, that's my profit. Are you guys following so far?
Yes.
Okay. Any question here? Anything that's not making sense, or you want me to go over again?
No.
No, Sandra,
Yes.
this is helpful. Okay, great. So this is, a situation where there is economic profit being made by this farm in the short run. Okay. So we could, as I mentioned, there could also be a situation, where they're making losses. Okay. So let's take a look at that. So the same idea again, you're gonna draw in the demand curve, the marginal revenue curve, and then I'm gonna draw the marginal cost. And this is my Q star at the intersection of MR and MC. And I'm gonna find P star over here. And now I'm gonna draw in my average raw cost. But because this is a situation where I'm gonna show that there is losses being made by this farm, I'm gonna draw the average raw cost curve, much higher. And it's gonna look something like this. Okay. So this is how much the average total cost of Q star is. And then the difference between P minus ATC times this base Q star, that then gives me my loss, right? So this is economic loss. Okay? This is, this should all be very familiar because, it's very similar to what we did with perfect competition and also, monopoly. So there's really not a whole lot of surprise here. Okay. And then hopefully you can understand, or when as soon as I tell you that there are no barriers to entry or exit, or very few barriers to entry or exit in monopolistic competition, you should easily, or you should be going, this is what should be going through your mind, that this is very similar to perfect competition. And what we saw in perfect competition is that when farms make economic profit in the short run, because there are no barriers to entry or exit, right, in this kind of market, other farms can come in very easily, and they want some of those profits for themselves, and they come in, and this is exactly what happens, right? Farms come in, and the profits get lower and lower until there is no more economic profit, or farms are only enjoying normal profit, right? So this is the same thing with monopolistic competition. So if you think back to monopoly, how was monopoly different? Sandra? How is a monopoly different, with regards to, entry or exit kind of thing? Is it hard or easy to enter a monopoly market?
Hard.
Hard, right? It's very hard. So therefore, if monopoly farms, right, make economic profit, do you think it's going to be easy or hard for them to hold on to that profit in the long run?
Easy.
Easy, right? Because they don't really have that fear that other farms can come in at any moment and take away my profit, because they know that they're going to be protected by those barriers. Okay, it's not the case for other farms, right? So here, perfect competition, very easy to come in and come out. Monopolistic competition, the same. So in the long run, in monopolistically competitive market, each farm will only earn zero economic profit, the same as we saw in perfect competition. They'll only earn normal profit in the long run. Okay, and the reason, or the way it happens in monopolistically competitive industries, is this. So when new farms come in, right, they're coming in with another heterogeneous product, right? So it's not like they're coming in and they're bringing something that is exactly identical to what already exists in the market. Okay, so when new farms enter the market, right, and they come in because they see that there are profits being made in this market, what they do is when they enter the market, they're essentially stealing some customers away from existing farms. Okay, so they're essentially lowering the demand for existing farms. So let's say, if we talk about an example of a gas station. Okay, so maybe you have a gas station in a neighborhood where it's doing really well. You see, you're making positive economic profit. Okay, so other people are going to see that, and they're going to want some of that profit for themselves. And maybe somebody opens up a gas station across the street from your gas station, and you're only providing gas. And what they do is they're going to come in and they're going to serve coffee. They might have a convenience store where you can buy other stuff too, or they might provide um, car washing, right? Where some gas stations have car wash services where we can just go in and wash your car for $5 or something. So they're going to find some way to make their product a little bit different. So what they're essentially doing is stealing some of your customers and lowering the demand for your gas, right, for your gas station. So this is what happens, right? When farms enter, they will lower the demand for your product will decrease. Okay, and it will also decrease your marginal revenue. Okay, so both of those curves will shift down. Both of those curves will shift down. And when farms exit, right, because they're making losses in the short run, so in the long run they're going to exit this market, and they can do that because there are no barriers really. And what that then does is that if you are a farm that had you had people, right, you had some customers, and if you are making loss and you exit this industry, you're not there anymore, what are the customers that were coming to you are going to do? So they're essentially they're just going to go and find alternative means, right? So they're going to go to the farms that have remained in the industry, right? So you exiting, or one farm exiting, will increase the demand and the marginal revenue for the farms that stayed. Okay, so both demand and marginal revenue will shift up for the cases of exit. When farms enter, demand and marginal revenue shifts down, and when farms exit, demand and marginal revenue will shift up. So of course this is not, we're not talking about what is happening to demand and marginal revenue for the farm that came in, right? So it's not for the farms that came in, it's for the farms, for the other farms, what is happening to their demand and their marginal revenue. Does that make sense? So we're going to take a look at it right now in this graph. So here, in this example, we are looking at the product that we're looking at are hot dogs. So here, this farm is called Bob's Hot Dog Shack. Okay, and Bob's competitors are everybody here. David, Gerard, Maya, Daniel, and Abe. So you can imagine that they all have slightly different types of hot dogs, which makes their hot dogs, different from each other, right? They're not identical. So we have the demand curve, the marginal revenue curve, and then I'm going to draw the marginal cost. So this is Q star, this is P star, And then the average total cost curve looks something like this. Oops. So this is where the profit box would be if I were to draw it in. Okay, it looks something like this, right? At the quantity of Q star, this is how much profit is being made by this monopolistically competitive farm. And then what's going to happen when there is profit being made by this hot dog shack? So what happens is that, he already has competitors, but new farms, right, they see that there is positive economic profit being made in this industry. So this other guy, Joseph, right, he has a hot dog stand, so he's gonna come in and join this market or industry. Okay. And when he comes in, what that does, so we're only looking at Bob right now, this individual farm, which is Bob. So what that does for Bob is that, maybe his hot dog stand, is offering, something more than Bob was. So essentially what this is going to do is it's going to lower Bob's demand, because he is going to steal some customers. Joseph is going to steal some customers away from Bob. Okay, so in essence, it's just lowering the demand for Bob's hot dog. So the way we show that, when there is a lower or decrease in demand, is we shift the demand curve down. So looks like this. So anytime we do any kind of shift, remember that, it has to be like a parallel shift, right? Supply or demand, uh, right? It has to be a parallel shift. We cannot just, do something like, like this kind of it, like, or not like that, but like this, right? They have to be parallel to each other. So I'm going to draw in another demand curve. The demand curve is shifting down. So another demand curve that's going to be parallel to this demand curve D over here. Okay. So here, I'm going to draw it like this. Okay, so this is D1. And then, of course, once I shift the demand curve, the marginal revenue curve will shift as well. And, the marginal revenue, the new marginal revenue curve will also have to be parallel to the original. So it looks something like this. Oops, not like that. Okay, so this is marginal revenue 1. Oops. Let me just try it again. It's not like completely there. Okay. So this is MR1. Okay. So as you can see, right, once we have a new demand curve and a new marginal revenue curve, there is, even because the marginal cost and the average total cost curve, nothing changed about those two. You can still see from this graph over here that there is now, let's see, a different intersection, right? There is now where the marginal revenue and marginal cost intersects each other now is different, right? So the quantity, of course, is lower than before. So this is the new profit maximizing quantity. And then the price is somewhere over here. Okay. P1. So what you should immediately notice about this is that, we have the price is now lower, the quantity is now lower, and price is now equal to the average total cost, right, for producing Q1. So price is equal to average total cost. And what does that mean? If there is no difference between price and average, or do we have profit anymore? Do you have positive economic profit anymore? If P is equal to ATC, right, and I multiply both by Q, what do I get? I get total revenue is equal to total cost. And when I have that, what do I have? Zero economic profit, right? We have normal profit. So this is what happens. And this is not, this should ring some bells from perfect competition, when we saw adjustments that happen in the long run. Okay, so what happened here is that one farm, this Bob's hot dog shack, was making economic profit, positive economic profit in the short run. And other farms saw that, and they wanted some of that profit for themselves. And so because there were very few barriers to entry in this market, so they were able to come in, right? And once they came in, the effect of that, right, is going to be shown by the demand curve. So here, this is, we're talking about Bob, this farmer or this hot dog vendor. So this was his original demand curve, and this gray line, that was his original marginal revenue. And the way we show that there are more farms coming in is by lowering or decreasing the demand for Bob. Okay, so we just shifted Bob's demand curve downward by a little bit. So when it was a parallel shift, and then we got this new demand curve D2 and this new marginal revenue curve MR2, and then we had new Q2, new quantity, new price, and then the price was exactly equal to average total cost, right, at this quantity. Okay, which means that it is the same as perfect competition, and in the long run, monopolistically competitive farms will only make zero economic profit or normal profit. Okay, I feel like I lost you guys. Are you still, are you guys having trouble understanding this, or is there something that you didn't quite get, or not clear from the picture?
No.
No. Sandra?
No.
No. Okay, so this is not very different than what we have seen so far. The only difference here is that we had to move two different curves, right? So we had to move our demand curve and our marginal revenue. And once we did that, we saw that there were new quantity and then new prices. And I intentionally did this here, to show you that at the end there will be zero economic profit, right? So I moved or I shifted the demand curve by some amount, so that I would get this quantity and this price, which would make it seem like we had zero economic profit. So I did that intentionally because that is what happens at the end. Okay. Any question?
No.
Okay. So this is all I'm gonna do for today, because when we come back, I'm gonna go over this situation of where there is loss in the short run, and also how monopolistically competitive markets are inefficient, basically. So that's it, and then we're gonna talk about oligopoly. But I just want to keep everybody at the same pace. So this is all we have for today. Any question?
No.
No. Sandra?
No.
Okay. All right. Then I will see you all on Tuesday of next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.